Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The cave was pitch black. However, when the warlock's eyes went closer, it started to tremble. It was like a small boat sailing in the midst of crazy wind and heavy storm. It could not withstand the presence of the strong magical wave. Yet, the magical wave was unrelated to the Crimson Python. Having battled a Crimson Python at Black Cloud's town, Lin Li was naturally more familiar with it. Like blazing flames, the scorching wave emitted by a Crimson Python would turn anything in close proximity to ashes. However, the force that the cave emitted was a massive pressure that could cause the warlock's eyes to lose control. The warlock's eyes swerved past the entrance of the cave. Although the unusual tremble was short-lived, it was what informed Lin Li of the death of the Crimson Python. He could not sense any Crimson Python in the cave. Apart from the strong and eerie pressure, there was only a deadly silence. Lin Li was not taken aback by that. Although a mutated Crimson Python could reach above level 20, it was not a legendary creature. After all, there ought to be a natural deficiency in both its strength and intelligence. As compared to that of the true legendary magical beasts, the combat energy of the Crimson Python was at least one realm behind. If it had been before, the difference would not have been a great deal. However, the combined force from the 1,000 adventurers from the Manhwa family as well as the 10 archmages from the Dark Blade in the Blackstone Mountains was impregnable. A legendary magical beast would have normally realized its lack of power and escaped from them. How different would it be for a mutated Crimson Python? Lin Li knew that he was late. But, Lin Li had no regrets. In this world, there were many people with the ability to defeat Crimson Pythons, yet only a few pharmacists could recognize the dragon's tongue. As long as the dragon's tongue was still there, losing that legendary magical crystal was no big deal. Anyway, the dragon's tongue was Lin Li's ultimate motive in coming to the Blackstone Mountains. Although Lin Li did not appear serious when he mentioned it to Jirian, it was a matter he had been contemplating ever since he'd won the finals and known that he would be sent to Breezy Plains to take charge of an unestablished guild of magic. At that time, Lin Li already had the idea to create a batch of rune potion. Breezy Plains did not have a single established political system. No one, not even the Supreme Council, the Brilliant Shrine, or the royals of Felon Kingdom, was able to gain total control over the territory. How would it be possible for a guild of magic that lacked reputation to survive there easily? Even though he was indeed esteemed in the field of magic, was already an archmage at the age of 20, and had the potential to reach the legendary realm in 10 years' time, Lin Li's influence had a limit. Unless he was as powerful as Juresco, Lin Li would never be able to even the playing field with forces like the Manhwa family and the Dark Blade, which had been around for centuries. For the Tower of Dusk to survive in the Breezy Plains, the only way was to make his organization more powerful. The current number of magic shooters in the Tower of Dusk would not suffice. The Tower of Dusk had nearly lost to the 50-odd men from the Dark Blade in the earlier battle. If Sendros and Lin Li had not arrived in the nick of time, the consequences would have been dire. The rune potion was the best solution. Although the rune potion would cause the skills of the magic shooters to stagnate for the rest of their lives, it was actually tempting for them to upgrade themselves through that potion. After all, what were the odds for all of them to reach the Archmage realm in their lives? Not to exaggerate, it was a fact that 90% of magic shooters in the world would never be able to progress to the Archmage realm. Losing the ability to progress further would not matter to them. Lin Li's life would be much easier with the 10 archmages in the Tower of Dusk, for they would have the capability to deter forces like the Sire Bandits. Furthermore, with the various magic defense systems in place, such as the All-Kill Array, Crystal Cannons, and the Skybreakers, just to name a few, even legendary-level figures would need to think twice before attacking the organization. Furthermore, that was just the beginning. The benefit of having 10 archmages was to buy time for the Tower of Dusk. It needed not be long, a year would suffice. If there were no hindrances from external forces, Lin Li had the confidence to bring the Guild of Magic to a higher ground within a year. If he was lucky enough, they would be as powerful as the Glitter Gold Trade Union and the Dark Blade. time was the only factor that they lacked the most. As long as they first had a few peaceful months, Lin Li had the confidence to gain enough profits from his partnership with the Gilded Rose and the Glitter Gold Trade Union for their equipment and pharmaceutical business, respectively. In addition, the business he'd entrusted Come On with would also ensure great inflow of money for the Tower of Dusk. Sufficient financial support would enable the rate of the development of the Tower of Dusk to speed up by 100-fold. Which mage would reject a guild with laid-back guild rules, vast knowledge and magic to access, generous support and resources, as well as a legendary mage like Basil as its advisor? Lin Li did not need a lot, either. As long as he could attract 20 archmages, create 10 more archmages with the rune potion, and employ 7 to 8 men who had potential to surpass level 15 sent by Basil, he would have a team of 40 archmages. With the help from the 2 legendary mages, Ujfalusi, who was regaining his position as a lich, as well as Basil, who was arriving at the breezy plains, not to mention the insignificant sire bandits, hooligans like the Dark Blade would also not dare to mess around with the Tower of Dusk. All of this could only be possible if he could acquire the 10 bottles of rune potion. The dragon's tongue in that cave was the real deal. At the same time, the battle of the 2 forces had come to an end. The 10 archmages from the Dark Blade got the upper hand, making 1,000 men and adventurers under the Manhwa family helpless. After losing around 200 adventurers, the people from Manhwa family started to retreat. Just when Lin Li thought the victor had emerged, something queer happened on the battlefield. It was true that the Manhwa family retreated. However, they were still a few hundred meters away from the cave. Damn, what is it now? Lin Li gasped after seeing 1,000 men gathering together. Are these people joking? How could they dare to gather within such a short distance from their enemy? How different are they from a lady who decides to do a strip dance in front of a pervert at night? Lin Li rubbed his nose and lowered his head. He could not bear to witness that perverted, brutal, and triple X-rated scene. Huh? Yet, he lifted his head very quickly again. That was because Lin Li was certain that he saw Dark Blade retreating as well. God damn it, do you not know how to be a pervert? Lin Li hollered. It was not Lin Li's fault that he felt agitated. If it were other men, they would also be cussing in rage if the spicy film they expected became just a common romance. How twisted would that be? Lin Li could not help but cuss when he saw the 2 groups of bastards staring at each other. Now that the 2 opposing teams were looking into each other's eyes with passion fervently, Lin Li knew he had no chance of making use of the commotion to sneak into the cave. My plans are crushed, exclaimed Lin Li in disappointment. It would not work if he were to sneak into the cave under the eyes of 1,000 men. Even if he were to turn into a housefly, he would be swatted down by that group of bastards. Should I try to anyway? Lin rubbed his nose uneasily. He was in a dilemma. You can summon the humorous WYRM, said Sendros. Huh? Lin Li froze. Then, he nodded, and took out the magic lamp from his pocket. When the humorous WYRM was summoned, everyone from the Tower of Dusk, including Jirian, were flabbergasted. The pallid and gigantic body, and that dragon crystal, which emitted a chilly blue glow, confirmed that it was a terrifying beast above level 20. The humorous WYRM was a very powerful existence. Being an incarnation of evil and death, its combat ability was on par with that of a lich, and comparable to a retribution knight's. With its starring in numerous folkloric legends of Amril, even a man as knowledgeable as Jirian would never have expected that he could witness a humorous WYRM, much less how it was being summoned. As long as one could summon a humorous WYRM, it would not matter if he were a mage or an apprentice. In theory, he would already have a legendary level combat energy. Furthermore, that fella who had just summoned the humorous WYRM was not a weakling. He was not just powerful, but terrifying. It was a fact that Jirian had seen this man progress from a level 8 mage to a level 19 archmage in less than a year. It was not something most mages could achieve in the duration of their life. The thought of it was horrifying enough. Now, this fella had a humorous WYRM with him. The sight of that creature at least 10 meters in height caused Jirian to be at a loss for words. Fortunately, Jirian was already used to such surprises. Unlike him, the other mages from the Tower of Dusk were dumbfounded. They stood rooted to the ground, and were all in a daze, their gazes fixed on that humorous Wyrm. If not for the fact that it was a bright and sunny day, they would have thought that they were all in a dream. "Your luck is really great," said Sendros as he gazed at the humorous Wyrm. There was indeed a way to summon a humorous Wyrm through necromagic. In fact, any necromancer in the legendary realm would be able to do it. However, only 1 in 10 necromancers would be willing to pay the hefty price necessary to summon a humorous Wyrm. He'd have to use a massive amount of mana to bring the humorous Wyrm from an alternate dimension to the Anral world. Even Sendros would never accept falling by 1 level just to summon a humorous Wyrm. The reason why Edgefalusi could summon Crimson was purely due to the coincidence he'd left a mark on Crimson's soul fire. The reason why the Lich at the Scar of Death was able to summon the humorous Wyrm was because he linked his life case with Gloomy Dark to tap into an unlimited amount of mana. Otherwise, how could any other necromancer be endowed by such an ability? Of course, Lin Li had the best luck. The humorous Wyrm he'd sealed in the magic lamp came for free. Apart from a level 15 magical crystal, he did not have to lose anything else. "Is this too risky?" Lin Li asked hesitantly even after he summoned the humorous Wyrm. To be honest, if it weren't for Sendros, he would prefer not to summon the humorous Wyrm in such a situation. Lin Li thought that it was very risky. He knew that the humorous Wyrm was going to be one of his strongest weapons in the future with its legendary level combat energy. He had to rely on the humorous Wyrm to protect the Tower of Dusk. If anything were to happen to the humorous Wyrm, all his plans would be destroyed completely. He wouldn't mind if it were the usual battle. Yet, his present enemies were the 2 great forces, the Manhwa family and Dark Blade. That being said, he was incredibly worried about that level 18 archmage. He was a man who truly had the ability to injure the humorous Wyrm, or even destroy the magical crystal and extinguish the soul fire of the humorous Wyrm. "Rest assured," Sendros said to the concerned Lin Li succinctly. Afterwards, he fished out a delicate box from his pocket. The box was around the size of a fist, and seemed to be carved from wood. It had a delicate, quaint, and graceful design, and had 2 streaks of mageweth produced with navy sand ink. Just when Lin Li was feeling doubtful why the box had mageweth that could withstand mana, the old man pressed a button on the box gently. Then, the lid opened. "What? What is this?" Lin Li exclaimed the instant the box was opened. There was a black gem resting inside the box. It was emitting a mysterious and profound glow under the afternoon sun. However, what surprised Lin Li was the magical wave emitted by that black gemstone. It was a pure death aura that could cause people to undermine a gigantic humorous Wyrm. "This is the Heart of the Fallen, a treasure that could drive any undead creature crazy, including myself. I've only seen 6 Hearts of the Fallen in my entire life before. 3 of them are in the bodies of the 3 undead lords, while the other 3 are in the Darkness Shrine. Only that high priest who practices necromagic has the right to use them." "Is it very powerful?" "That's right. To an undead creature, acquiring a Heart of the Fallen is equivalent to engulfing soul fire from millions of other undead creatures. That Heart of the Fallen can transform any undead creature," explained Sendros. "But, the value of the Heart of the Fallen is not in the enhancement of abilities, but in giving the undead creature a brand new life." "You have to be joking," exclaimed Lin Li. He nearly bit his tongue. Thankfully, the words belonged to Sendros. If he were another man, Lin Li would lash out at him. "Hee, how could the Fallen have any heart?" "The word heart here means to have a life." Lin Li stared Sendros for a good moment. Then, he decided that the old man did not seem to be joking. "What would happen if undead creatures are given a life?" asked Lin Li with apprehension as he swallowed his saliva. I've only met 3 undead creatures that own a heart of the fallen. They are the 3 undead lord of the Shadow Glen. You might not believe me, but the 3 undead lord are as good as the living. If they were to hide their identity from you, you wouldn't be able to recognize them even in close proximity. Frack. Oh, yes. I've forgotten to tell you that the power of each of the 3 undead lords is at least level 25. That can't be, Lin Li commented skeptically. According to Mr. Macklin, the ability of the 3 undead lords should be at level 23. Are you referring to that Macklin from the Alana Guild of Magic? How would he know how terrifying the 3 undead lords are when he had not even met them before? Level 23 was just a prediction by the Alana Guild of Magic. I'm certain that no more than 5 people in the entire Anril would have seen the 3 undead lords. Hey, you really have some great luck, repeated Sendros. I really can't comprehend how you managed to do that. Although it had only a level 20 magical crystal, it had the purest soul fire that is comparable to those of the 3 undead lords. If it acquires the heart of the fallen, it is going to have a real life within a decade. It is a long story, Lin Li said as he grinned at Sendros. Just when he intended to create a sense of suspense, the sight of the heart of the fallen in Sendros' hand caused Lin Li to freeze. Don't tell me you are thinking of. You are right. As long as it integrates the heart of the fallen into its soul fire, the humorous WYRM would get a certain level of intelligence. Although it is not going to become extremely clever, it would still be stronger than any common, humorous WYRM. With its overwhelming strength, defeating 10 archmages shouldn't be that much of a problem. While Sendros was speaking with much confidence, Lin Li shook his head and glanced at him skeptically. You don't look a single bit like a generous person, though. To be honest, I initially wanted to leave the heart of the fallen for myself. In fact, I have been wanting to do that for these few decades. One intelligent humorous WYRM is enough for me to surpass the successes of all the formal high priests. However, the price I have to pay to summon the humorous WYRM is tremendous, enough to bring me down from the legendary realm. I haven't had the confidence to take this risk for the past few decades. It was only just now that I realized it would be easier to strike a deal with you. What deal? I need a bottle of the Tribute of Darkness. Lin Li muttered as he rubbed his nose. This old man is indeed not as generous. That was true. The heart of the fallen was indeed valuable. If one had good luck, they might be able to create an undead lord with it. However, if he were to exchange that for a bottle of the Tribute of Darkness, there wouldn't be any loss for him. If the heart of the fallen could create another humorous WYRM lord, the Tribute of Darkness would be able to produce another Lich Lord. While the former had incredible combat skills, the latter was a greatly esteemed master of necromagic. As both creatures were at their ultimate level, there was nothing for Sendros to lose regardless of which he chose. The Tribute of Darkness was also known as a sacred undead potion. The production thereof would require the ever-chill flower from the Arctic, as well as the fruit of the heart-devouring tree that grew as deep as 33 levels into the abyss. Although Lin Li had not seen the 2 herbs before, he had heard that the ever-chill flower might exist in the Arctic plains that was located at the north of the Endless Ocean. As for the fruit of the heart-devouring tree, 33 levels deep into the abyss was a place even the Mad Osric would not dare to step into. However, the effects of the Tribute of Darkness were true to its nature as a sacred undead potion. It was said that anyone who consumed the Tribute of Darkness would instantly be converted to a form of darkness, the closest to a type of primitive magic. Under the form of darkness, one could manipulate the elements of dark magic to his desires with perfect control, just like the reincarnation of darkness. Even if the one to consume the Tribute of Darkness was a mage apprentice below level 5, he would be able to make amazing achievements in the field of necromagic. Not to exaggerate, he would become the most powerful necromancer in the world, and reach the legendary realm within a decade. To necromancers, the Tribute of Darkness was a dreamlike treasure. No necromancer, not even the powerful Sendros, could resist the temptation of acquiring it. If he were to get his hands on that potion, there was a high chance for him to surpass level 25. Of course, the difficulty of making a Tribute of Darkness was equally terrifying. The ever-chill flower and the fruit of the heart-devouring tree were extremely rare ingredients, even more so than the black lotus. Although Lin Li was well-versed in the field, he had never seen either of them before. He also felt guilty for not having sufficient skills to produce the tribute of darkness. Among the formulae of all the potions at the guru level, the difficulty in creating the tribute of darkness was the greatest. There were many pharmacists who believed that anyone who could produce the tribute of darkness would have the skills of a divine smith. Although Lin Li knew the steps to create the potion, he knew that his success rate would not exceed 30%. I do not have confidence in making the tribute of darkness. Why don't you suggest something else? I have a lot of time. I can wait for you to reach the guru realm until you have gathered all the materials and have enough confidence. Why me? Lin Li cast a doubtful glance on Sandros. He could not comprehend the stubbornness of the old man. The value of both goods was exactly the same, and it was not what he could produce now. It was as if Sandros had decided to exchange a real heart of the fallen for a chance to get the tribute of darkness. I have no choice, Sandros replied smilingly. You are the pharmacist with the greatest potential to reach the guru realm in the whole of Amrel. I can only strike a deal with you if I want the tribute of darkness. All right, then, agreed Lin Li. Since Sandros had already put his statement across so directly, there was no reason for Lin Li to reject his request. Oh, yes. How do I integrate the heart of the fallen into the soul fire of the humorous WYRM? Let me help you, offered Sandros. I will trouble you, then, replied Lin Li as he took a step back. He saw Sandros open the box gently while reciting a spell in his hoarse voice. He emitted a strong death aura that caused the humorous WYRM to glance around before bending over. The soul fire of the humorous WYRM was like a ball of blue flame at its chest. Within it was its dragon crystal. Sandros reached his hand to gently pat the WYRM's head. Then, he took out the black gemstone from the box. When the gemstone hovered above his palm, Lin Li could see very clearly that the heart of the fallen was beating like a real heart. Lin Li watched the situation quietly. How would a humorous WYRM look like if it were to have its own life? Unfortunately, he had not met the humorous WYRM lord at the Shadowglen the other day. Otherwise, it might be like real dragon. Wait a minute, Lin Li spoke. The thought of the trial battle at the Shadowglen made Lin Li realize something. Darn, how did the bastards of the Supreme Council gain the confidence to dump the 24 trial students into a dangerous place like the Shadowglen? It was a place where the 3 undead lords of at least level 25 resided. The 3 lords had the ability to destroy the earth, let alone the potential deaths they could claim among the 24 students. How different would it be to smash 24 ants? Being the representatives of the 24 guilds, more than half of the 24 trial students were already seen as the successors of the respective guild presidents. In the event of any disastrous happenings, wouldn't the 24 guilds turn the tables against the Supreme Council? Not to mention the teleportation scrolls. As Lin Li had been only level 15 then, he had been totally clueless about the spells above level 20. When the people from the Supreme Council told him that the teleportation scroll was a reliable tool, Lin Li could only believe them foolishly. His realization only came when he scaled the Blackstone Mountains and battled the Lich at Scar of Death. God damn it, I've fallen into their trap the other time. How would the level 20 Lin Li not know that the darn teleportation scroll was just a piece of waste paper in the eyes of true legend powerhouses? No matter how reliable the teleportation scroll was, it was just a spell that helped to seal a realm. In this world, all magic would be affected by the limitations of laws. Once the laws were forcefully altered, the teleportation scroll would become a useless piece of paper. People from the legendary realm had too many methods to do just that. The thought of it caused Lin Li to break out in a cold sweat. Did the Supreme Council have no better things to do? Lin Li uttered in rage. Then, he realized something was amiss. He had met many people from the Supreme Council. There were Herza, Anduin, and also Apophis, an arbitrator who had been around for 1,300 years. Apart from the muddle-headed Anduin, the others were all seasoned old veterans. How would the Supreme Council be foolish enough to send the trial students to their deaths in the Shadowglen, and wait for the 24 guilds to turn against them? Oh yes, there was also the battle trial in the Aurora Square. Lin Li thought he had gotten the answers quite some time ago. He understood that the death energy from the Shadowglen had to be an underhand trick to make use of Garrett's body. Otherwise, the difference in Garrett's abilities would not be that great. What followed was even more queries. Lin Li had been wondering how the death energy descended upon the Aurora Square ever since he met Apophis. It was because that man once said that Alana Guild of Magic was the first guild of magic of Amril, and that its first president was Juresco. Before the man departed Amril, he left his magic staff in Alana Guild of Magic. Ever since, it had been protecting the guild. Alright, even if that death energy was from one of the undead lords, it was true that a level 25 undead lord would not have the ability to defeat Juresco's magic staff. After all, an undead lord was just an undead creature, no matter how almighty it was. Juresco was a real divinity. Unless somebody made it descend upon the Aurora Square, deliberately, Lin Li could sense very vaguely that he had come even closer to the truth. Although what he was guessing might not be entirely correct, he had much confidence in it. Oh yes, there was Andoin as well. The old man brought himself to the Nightmare Mountains right before the trial at the Shadowglen, where he found that dark red crystal. The timeliness is getting suspicious. It seems that I have to speak to Mr. Mentor. Just when Lin Li was deep in thought, a high-pitched sound reverberated in the air. Lin Li jerked his head up instinctively, and saw the soul fire at the chest of the humorous WYRM had transformed into a beating heart. The thick death aura of the humorous WYRM simmered almost instantaneously. What replaced it was a faint sense of solemnity and authority, just as though it was the king of all the beasts. Its majestic posture and demeanor took away the fighting spirit from its enemies. It was just like when Lin Li met Tutankhamun in the forest the other night. Apart from that, the two will-o'-the-wisp in the eyes of the humorous WYRM grew brighter. They were not as void and ominous as before. Lin Li could sense that underlying the flickering was excitement. It is alive now. The humorous WYRM has come alive. Alright, I paid you the rewards for the tribute of darkness in advance. Thank you. After thanking Sendros, Lin Li tried to give the humorous WYRM an instruction through the summon contract. He realized how different things had become. He did not have to control every action of the WYRM through the summon contract anymore. Attack those humans. The humorous WYRM caught on the vague order almost perfectly. A thunderous dragon cry reverberated as it spread its wings and swooped down above the nest of the crimson python. What followed was an overspread of ice flame. At once, shrieks sounded outside the nest of the crimson python. The ice flame turned most adventurers into ice statues, wreaking havoc among the people from the two forces. There were shrieks, cries for help, gasps, sound of footsteps, and many other noises. Amidst the chaos, many also injured their allies unknowingly. Only the 10 archmages were still alert. They cast the levitation spell and swooped towards the humorous WYRM in the sky as soon as the ice flame was cast. Alright, it is our time to shine. It was natural for the two great forces to put their attention on their battle at hand. At the same time, there were two black figures speeding out from the forest in a distance away, running towards the nest of the crimson python. The shadow of the humorous WYRM seemed to turn the entire world gray. Amidst the crazy wind was countless flying debris mixed with fallen leaves. When the blue ice flame came from the sky again, it was as if doomsday had arrived. Despite being level 18, the 10 archmages from Dark Blade immediately became inferior to the WYRM. None of them had the ability to battle the WYRM by himself. The gap between level 18 and level 20 was tremendous. It did not allow any chance for mistakes. They had to exert full powers to try to be on par with the humorous WYRM. If that was the case for the 10 archmages, the rest of the adventures naturally fell out of the picture. In such a battle, people below level 15 were like cannon fodder. They would not be able to threaten the WYRM in the slightest. The only thing they could do was to struggle and call for help while they were attacked by the ice flames. The two forces that were still orderly a while ago were plunged into chaos at once. With that, the lightning speed at which Lin Li and Sendros were moving at did not matter anymore. Even if they were to stroll, they would be able to enter the nest of the Crimson Python with ease. The Crimson Python is really dead, Lin Li commented after he cast the illuminating spell and saw the fresh blood on the walls of the cave. He brushed his fingers against it and held them to his nose. It smelled like the blood of the Crimson Python he'd encountered at Black Cloud's town. From that, he could conclude that there was a high chance that the python in this cave had been attacked. Lin Li surveyed the surroundings, but could not find the body of the Crimson Python. He was not surprised. Lin Li knew very well that even the body of the Crimson Python was worth a fortune. Its skin could cost above 100 million. Being durable and a natural insulator of magic, it would be ideal for it to be sewn into a leather armor. Its two fangs could also be used to enhance magical weapons. If a bit of its venom were to be smudged onto a bandit's dagger, the poisoning effect would be more deadly than the toxin of the salamander. Of course, the most important object was still the magical crystal of the Crimson Python. That was a legendary magical crystal that would excite even a lich like Ujfalusi. Being a priceless existence in the market, legendary magical crystals had led many mages to bankruptcy. Whoever had killed the Crimson Python, regardless of whether it was the Manhwa family or the Dark Blade, would never let such a massive fortune slide past them. However, Lin Li's main goal was not the Crimson Python. While it was great to acquire the body of the python, his eyes were on the ultimate prize, the dragon's tongue. In fact, he still did not have the time to tidy up the body of another Crimson Python that he kept frozen in the Tower of Dusk. In Lin Li's eyes, the value of a dragon's tongue herb was 10 times greater than that of 10 Crimson Pythons. The nest of the Crimson Python was very bizarre. The entrance of the nest was eccentrically narrow, making Lin Li doubt for a moment whether it was a space a huge Crimson Python could be lugged out from. This skepticism decreased when the space of the nest widened as they traveled deeper into the nest. The dimension of the nest was as wide as to house at least 10 Crimson Pythons after Lin Li walked for 700 to 800 meters into the cave. Throughout the journey, he saw many human corpses, and from the consistency of their blood, it seemed like they did not die too long ago. F***ck. Lin Li gasped when his gaze landed on something other than the human corpses. There were 10 human-sized python eggs within 100 meters of the place where he was standing. However, the sight of the broken shells on the ground caused Lin Li to realize that they had all been intentionally broken by people. The egg whites and yolks were mixed together and emitted a pungent stench. How unfortunate, Sendros commented in disappointment. The 10 eggs might not be that much of a deal to common people. However, to an undead master like Sendros, those eggs had the great potential to hatch haunted pythons. The power of 10 haunted pythons would certainly not lose to a humorous WYRM's. In fact, obtaining the eggs of the Crimson Python to hatch the haunted pythons was in Sendros' calculations when he agreed to accompany Lin Li here. Unfortunately, the despicable deed done here had eliminated Sendros' hopes. "This is weird," Lin Li said frowningly as he glanced at the broken eggs. Usually, the eggs would be located where the Crimson Python rested. As the growth of the dragon's tongue should be activated by their presence, it would only make sense for Lin Li to spot them here. However, despite engaging the warlock's eyes, he was unable to locate any traces of the dragon's tongue. "Are we too late?" Lin Li asked anxiously. That was the first thought that came to his mind. Although there shouldn't be more than 10 pharmacists who would know the effects of the dragon's tongue in the entire Anril, Lin Li could not rule out the possibility that there might be some lucky ones who picked it anyway, thinking it was a normal herb. Furthermore, the intense battle earlier claimed more than 100 lives from the two forces. What if they had destroyed the dragon's tongue in the process? The thought of such possibilities made Lin Li turn pallid. "What is it?" Sendros asked in concern. He could sense Lin Li's uneasiness. "The dragon's tongue might not be here," said Lin Li. Just as he was about to explain further, he noticed something unusual with the cloudy substances ahead. The mixture of egg whites and egg yolks from the 10 broken eggs covered a few dozen meters. At his first glance, Lin Li did not pay much attention to the pythons that died prematurely due to the disastrous scene. However, Lin Li realized very quickly that the spillage that had initially covered a few dozen meters appeared to be smaller in surface area as compared to before. At the start, Lin Li thought he had seen it wrong. However, he realized very quickly that the coverage of the sticky substances was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as though there was a gigantic sponge that was soaking up those substances. Could that mean? Lin Li gasped. The unusual sight hinted at another possibility. The dragon's tongue was a very rare herb. Although Lin Li was well versed in pharmacy and herbalism, he only knew that the growth of the herb had to be enhanced by 1 female and 1 male mutated crimson python. They would be providing the herb with the energy necessary to grow, and the dragon's tongue would only mature after the female crimson python laid her eggs. However, he knew nothing about the mechanics behind the phenomenon. Hence, when he saw that scene, he could only make wild guesses. Could the gigantic sponge be the true form of the dragon's tongue herb? It was very easy to ascertain that hypothesis. Lin Li engaged the warlock's eyes and flew it above the cloudy mess. What he saw was a dragon's tongue with 10 leaves, covered in the mixture of egg white and egg yolk. However, the dragon's tongue before him seemed to be a little eccentric. Its 10 leaves were huge and plump, twice the size of the regular dragon's tongue's leaves. When covered by the egg mixture, it squirmed like 10 lobes of lungs. What stunned Lin Li was how quickly the cloudy substance got absorbed while the leaves squirmed. A huge patch of substance was absorbed for every breath Lin Li took. God damn it, is this the legendary making of a spirit? Lin Li asked with his mouth agape. Despite being a guru in 5 series, Lin Li was like an illiterate. He had absolutely no idea what implications the phenomenon was going to bring about. Lin Li could only stand still and watch the 10 squirming leaves in a daze. The dragon's tongue submerged in the sticky substance was really like a huge sponge. It soaked up all the substance around it entirely, and turned the moist and wet ground dry. When Lin Li walked towards it, he deliberately stomped hard on the ground, and discovered that it was definitely all dry and hard under his shoes. If not for the broken eggshells strewn all over, Lin Li might have thought that what he saw a while ago was just a hallucination. Nasty, Lin Li cussed. How strange for the dragon's tongue to be able to absorb the contents of 10 python eggs so efficiently. At the same time, something abnormal happened. The already plump leaves grew bigger, reaching the size of a palm. Its green pigments disappeared. What replaced it was a satanic shade of red. At a glance, it looked like a burning flame. Lin Li could not sense the supposed dragon's tongue anymore. Instead, he detected a menacing and scorching feeling. It was as though he was standing under the afternoon summer sun, where he exposed his skin to toxic light rays. Lin Li knew that it was not the dragon's tongue he knew anymore. Lin Li could not explain the situation. He only knew that the magical energy from the monstrous shrub was thrice what the normal dragon's tongue could produce. If he were to use it to create the rune potion, he might not produce something as simple as level 15 archmages. Of course, that was on the condition that he had the ability to control the properties of the herb. Regardless, Lin Li had fulfilled his greatest goal in coming to the Blackstone Mountains. That shrub of dragon's tongue meant that the Tower of Dusk would have an addition of at least 10 archmages. With such a strong combat force, the ability of the Tower of Dusk would rise to the middle upper range in the breezy plains. Lin Li certainly had the confidence to groom the Tower of Dusk into a force as mighty as the Glitter Gold Trade Union and the Dark Blade. Lin Li recited a spell as soon as the roots of the mutated dragon's tongue left the soil. The white fog that rose from his palms engulfed the entire dragon's tongue at once. It released a chilly force that completely suppressed the hotness of the herb. After Lin Li was done with the recitation, the mutated dragon's tongue in his hands had also transformed into an ice sculpture. Within the translucent crystal-like ice, the 10 crimson leaves emitted an ominous ray of light. Only after all that was done did Lin Li have a chance to look around the nest of the crimson python carefully. He was certain that the nest belonged to the male and female crimson python. The underground flow of lava located at around 200 meters away emanated vicious fire magical element that lingered in the air. This was the most conducive environment for any crimson python to live in. Lin Li put the herb into his ring of endless storm and looked in the direction of the deepest part of the nest. That was the end of the underground lava. The dancing sparks and vicious fire magical element were so hot that it caused dizziness. There were 2 gigantic stone pillars amidst the flickering flames. To Lin Li, those 2 pillars were the greatest mystery. How could one end of the pillars be bubbling with lava, and the other end shrouded in infinite darkness? The 2 stone pillars were like a magical gate that directed the underground lava into a world of unknown. Damn, doesn't the small path Tutankhamun mentioned look narrower than expected, said Lin Li as he rubbed his nose in a daze. In fact, his stay at the Blackstone Mountains allowed Lin Li to understand a great part of Tutankhamun's identity. When he was giving the heart of the fallen to the humorous Wyrm, the force he felt was similar to that of Tutankhamun. That caused Lin Li to realize that it was a majestic force unique to a Wyrm. Without a doubt, the almighty middle-aged man with the vast knowledge of Anril's history was the legendary black dragon that had been in captivity in the Blackstone Mountains. However, what Lin Li did not expect was that the legendary peak of the Blackstone Mountains was an alternate dimension. On top of that, he did not expect the space to feel so familiar. The 2 stone pillars before him were covered with numerous patterns. It looked delicate and intrinsic from afar, and the spells contained within were of great levels. Its complicatedness could only be described as terrifying. There were at least 7 languages used in the spell, which the dragon language and high elven language dominated. At the less obvious parts lay the legendary Titan language, or the language that people called divine. The mageweths on the pillars were beyond imagination. There were hundreds of mageweths glowing brilliantly behind the flames. Yet, the scene was extremely familiar to Lin Li. He had encountered many of those complicated patterns when he still had the Stars of Fury. When he just came out from the Well of the Sun with the most powerful weapon, with the mission of hunting down the most powerful living being in the endless world, he took countless attempts to accomplish the task. Every time before he entered the nest of Azardas, the dragon of destruction, he would see similar patterns outside. Coincidentally, Anril, too, had a legend about the dragon of destruction. It was said that, in the prehistoric times, there was a fatal battle between dragons and titans which nearly destroyed the whole Anril. It was also said that titans were the descendant of the gods. They had the earth as their shields, the lightning as their spears, and the ability to manipulate crazy winds and vicious flames to tear the sky and crack the earth. On the other hand, there were 5 dragons that acted as the guardians of Anril. The dragon of time controlled the laws of time and space, the dragon of dream controlled the rules of nature and balance, the dragon of life had power over kindness and brightness, the dragon of destruction had influence over evil and darkness, lastly, the dragon of chaos controlled the laws of origin and end. The dragon of life was also known as the Holy Wyrm. While it was unfortunate that the dragon of life fell during the battle in the prehistoric times, it did not result in the disappearance of the rules of kindness and brightness. Instead, they transformed into a ray of light that shone over the entire Anril. This ray of light was the holy light that the brilliant shrine believed in. There was another dragon that fell together with the dragon of life. That was the dragon of destruction. The only difference between the dragons was that the dragon of destruction controlled the laws of evil and darkness, which were inherited by his sons. One ruled over evil, while the other over darkness. The influence of the force was definitely not what common level 20 dragons could battle against. Even if each of the 2 sons of the dragon of destruction inherited half of their father's powers, they were definitely an almighty existence in Anril. No one below the sanctuary realm could be on par with them. Lin Li could ascertain Tutankhamun's identity when he saw the numerous patterns on the pillars. The only thing left for Lin Li to ponder was which of the 2 sons was Tutankhamun. That's weird. While Lin Li murmured to himself, Sendros had also realized the unusual characteristics of the 2 pillars. He waved his skeleton staff and summoned a vengeful spirit from the corpses in the distance. Under Sendro's control, this vengeful spirit let out a shrill scream and charged into that infinite darkness. What followed was another ear-piercing cry. Before Sendros could react, that vengeful spirit, together with Sendro's mental strength that he'd placed on the spirit, was engulfed by the infinite darkness instantly. Although that bit of mental strength was not crucial to the legendary powerhouse, the outrageous engulfing placed a frown on Sendro's face. It's no use. No magic can pass through the door of truth. That is because it is a totally different world at the other side of the door. The rules there are crazily different from Amril's. You can only distort the laws when you reach the sanctuary realm. While Lin Li spoke, he cast a levitation spell. He swerved towards the door of truth slowly under the force of the magical elements. What are you going there for? Sendros gasped. I can't help it. One of my old friend's sons lives there and wanted to meet me. I will come back in a bit. After telling Sendros that, Lin Li picked up his speed and disappeared into the infinite darkness instantaneously. Son of an old friend. Sendros repeated after Lin Li, but could not fathom who that old friend might be. It was not his fault. The old friend Lin Li was referring to was actually Azardas, the dragon of destruction that died under the stars of fury. Lin Li had spent nearly a year in Amril. He journeyed from the Sunset Mountains to the Blackstone Mountains, and had long discovered the unruly parallel between Endless World and Amril. Although it did not seem that the two worlds had much similarity on the surface, with a little more effort, it was not difficult to realize that it was as if both of the worlds were like straight lines that shared the same starting point, just going in absolutely different directions. At this time, Lin Li was very confident that Azardas was the name of the dragon of destruction in Amril World. That was why Lin Li had a strong urge to discover the reason why the son of the old man would want to invite him over. Of course, Lin Li was even more curious about the relationship between the two worlds. Why did he even transmigrate to Amril? That was a question that surfaced in Lin Li's mind when he laid his hands on Gloomy Dark, when he was at the Scar of Death. This doubt grew stronger exponentially over time. When Lin Li saw the Door of Truth, his decision to go through it was made without any hesitation. It had caused him to deny any possible dangers behind the door. Behind the Door of Truth was infinite darkness. Rules had lost their meaning in the darkness that was void of time and space. Lin Li did not know how far or long he had flown. His consciousness was very low in the infinite darkness. Perhaps after a second or a year, when he opened his eyes again, Lin Li was in a completely different world. Greetings, little mage. You are here as expected, a familiar voice rang by Lin Li's ear. He turned to see Tutankhamun, the man who had once eaten his barbecue without paying. Beside Tutankhamun were one familiar person and another unfamiliar person. The familiar one was Hutton, the first heir of the Manhwa family. On his face was a mixture of dismay and shock. It was obvious that he had not expected Lin Li's sudden appearance. The other stranger was very young, and looked the same age as Hutton. He was also wearing a long black robe. When he stood by Hutton, the magical wave that he emitted was not behind that of the proclaimed magic genius of the breezy plains. However, he did not know why, but that mage did not have a friendly vibe. Lin Li realized that the moment Tutankhamun spoke. The gaze that young man placed on him was one that was riddled with enmity. It was as though they were magical beasts that went out hunting and had their eyes set on the same prey. What the f***ck? Lin Li muttered as he pursed his lips. He thought that the gaze should belong to Hutton, whose family he had greatly offended. What did that fella mean by that sneer? President Felix, what a coincidence, that was Hutton, who looked very surprised when he spoke. After the annihilation of Vanscore's bandits, the relationship between both men became very awkward. They were neither friends nor enemies, although they were not friendly with each other. There had not been any direct confrontation between them. They would have forgotten about each other after a few months if not for the sudden meeting in the Blackstone Mountains. Unfortunately, fate brought them together in less than a bit. To be honest, if he could, Hutton really did not want to meet that young president anymore. That man was too dangerous. Although he had not entirely believed what Adelo told him, it did not mean that he paid no attention to Adelo's words. He was very clear about Adelo's personality. That senior apprentice of his was not somebody who would exaggerate so much. Even if things that happened at the Scar of Death were not entirely the same as what Adelo told him, his words would be very close to the truth. Even if Adelo spoke a lot of lies, the lives of the over 300 elite bandits would not be a lie. Those 300 esteemed bandits, including their chief, the level 18 warrior, Vanskor, got wiped out in 30 minutes. It was a brutal and powerful fight that gave people goosebumps just at the thought of it. That was the reason why he would retreat overnight. He wanted to avoid the impending confrontation. He even gave up on claiming the favor Sendros promised him. It was true that Sendros was a true legendary powerhouse. If he were to render his help, he would be the only man that would walk through the door of truth. He could not believe that he would meet him again behind the door of truth after everything that had happened. The first sight of Lin Li caused Hutton's heart to skip a beat. Damn it, my plans are ruined. Hutton did not have time to think otherwise. He only had one thought in mind: he had to think of a way to forge a good relationship with that young president. Yeah, what a coincidence. Lin Li's reaction gave Hutton a sense of relief. It seemed that the young guild president had already forgotten the unhappiness that happened between them previously. After hearing his greeting, that man answered him with a very friendly smile. Oh, yes, President Felix. I nearly forgot to ask you. What brings you here? Hee. Lin Li smiled with the same friendly expression. However, he glanced at that stranger as he spoke. I had quite some bad luck. I just encountered a sneak attack when I passed by the nest of the Crimson Python. I had no other choice but hide in that nest. Who knew it'd bring me here? The expression of the young man changed the moment Lin Li opened his mouth. Oh, yes. This is, asked Lin Li deliberately after ranting as he glanced at that stranger blankly. Oh, right. If not for President Felix's reminder, I would have forgotten to introduce you to each other. By this time, Hutton's smile became extremely awkward. This is Stephen from the Dark Blade. He is a level 17 archmage, the best magic talent in the Breezy Plains. Hutton turned to Stephen and continued, this is President Felix, the owner of the Tower of Dusk, a mage that even Senior Adelo respects. It is my pleasure to meet you, Lin Li greeted Stephen. In fact, that introduction was redundant. Lin Li had guessed it right. Not to mention that there were few archmages in the Breezy Plains who were younger than 30 years old. There were even fewer who were at level 17. Furthermore, his change in expression upon the mention of a sneak attack gave him away. He knew that this man should be the sworn enemy of the Manhwa family, the heir of the Dark Blade. What is the Tower of Dusk? I've never heard of it, Stephen remarked as he looked at Lin Li slightly. As for trash like Adelo, he is still a level 17 even though he followed Cheyenne for 10 years. If he were to show respect to someone, I guess there's nothing to be proud of anyway. Stephen's words brought out sparkles in Hutton's eyes. That was right. Hutton planned to sow discord between both men. Otherwise, he would not have thought of introducing Stephen to Lin Li after the mention of the sneak attack. That was as good as telling Lin Li plainly that the mastermind behind the sneak attack was the man before him, and that he could take the chance to take revenge immediately. To Hutton, the personality of the young guild president would bring him to flip the table as soon as he knew the truth. Having killed 300 people in the split of a second, how could he show any respect to somebody from the Dark Blade? However, Hutton's optimism did not allow him to expect Stephen to be so accommodating to his plans. He just said that he had not heard of the Tower of Dusk. That was a plain insult that could enrage anybody, not only that young President Felix. Now it was great. One was an archmage that was almost on par with himself, and another was a powerful mage that Adelo admired. If both of them were to start a battle, he was certain that one of them would be dead. By then, it meant that he managed to get rid of one opponent without much effort. Even if Tutankhamun interfered in the confrontation, there was still nothing for Hutton to lose, either. The two people would not combine forces against him once their relationship had been damaged. To him, that was the most ideal situation. Unfortunately, Hutton's hopes were dashed very quickly. Stephen's words did not affect the bright and passionate smile on President Fellick. It was as though the words were a compliment instead of insult. Hee, I like how Mage Stephen is so straightforward. How would Lin Li not understand Hutton's intention of sowing discord between him and Stephen? Hutton had to be waiting for both men to fight and get rid of either opponent. Of course, Lin Li had no objections to getting rid of Stephen. He was the guy that had sent people to launch a sneak attack on Gavin and his team. That was a score that he would be settling in the future. Now, he did not have the time to do so. How could he think about revenge when he was standing before the son of the Dragon of Destruction? Howdy, Mr. Tutankhamun. I can't believe that we met so quickly again. Hee, I know you have a lot of burning queries, Tutankhamun replied. It was as though he knew what Lin Li was thinking about. The mysterious middle-aged man was able to predict what was on Lin Li's mind as soon as he opened his mouth. Yes, Mr. Tutankhamun, could you tell me the reason behind all these happenings? It is because of a promise. Tutankhamun's gaze swept past the three men before stopping on Lin Li. It is a promise that was made more than 1,300 years ago. Alright, now that everybody is here, let's find a nice place to talk about it. As Tutankhamun finished his sentence, the scenery around them took a change. The previously deserted land transformed into luscious greenery. The three men saw a wooden cottage hidden behind the thickets, and followed Tutankhamun in its direction. Their eyes were filled with amazement. Being rare talents in the field of magic, the three men would naturally not take the transformation of their surroundings as an illusion. In fact, the situation was not something that could be explained by an illusion. There was not a single tree or stone that was imaginary here. Even the fragrance carried by the flowers, grass, and soil was as in the real world. That was not what any illusion in the world could achieve. That could only be reality. A reality that changed according to Tutankhamun's intentions. Since you are all here, I bet you have heard about the promise. Those words were directed to Hutton and Stephen. Hutton nodded his head respectfully. That's right, Mr. Tutankhamun. According to the records, the Manhwa family would be able to reclaim some things from you after 1,300 years. Yeah, Tutankhamun smiled and shook his head. There is a problem with your family's ancient books. Oh? The real owner of those things is not the Manhwa family you were referring to. They were Juresco's. Juresco. The three young mages let out a gasp as soon as Tutankhamun finished talking. Juresco's name carried some sort of charisma that only the immortal king had the privilege to challenge in the entire history of Anril. Juresco was born in the last year of the Dark Age. In that century, the cruel rule of the High Elves reached its peak. Revolts and repression were omnipresent, and every inch of land in Anril was stained with fresh blood. The parents of Juresco were the two most famous mages of Felon Kingdom. Such a family background gave Juresco the best and strictest magic education from young. He became an archmage at the age of 20, reached the legendary realm being 23 years old, and entered the sanctuary realm at the age of 30. His talent in magic was unprecedented. In the final battle, Juresco defeated the entire Magic Legion alone. He killed the invincible queen of the High Elves and put a stop to the legendary period, the Dark Age. That battle raised Juresco's reputation to the peak. He became the strongest mage in all history and the mortal who was the closest to God. He was the living magic god. However, the magic god rejected all requests for him to stay, and returned to Alana alone. He lived in a tall tower in the northwest of Alana for 2 decades, and modified the magic system. Apart from making magic more suitable to be studied by humans, Juresco established the Supreme Council and the magic guilds under it. He made improvements to the environment for learning magic so that it would be accessible to all human beings. Those were the 2 most important things that happened in the history of Anril. In Anduin's words, the 2 deeds done by Juresco had helped to speed up the development of magic in the human world by 1,000 years. If not for him, human mages would have still been exploring the concept of magic ignorantly. It meant that humans would need another 1,000 years to achieve the same glory as the High Elves. Juresco's outstanding contributions sped up the development of human study of magic. The human mages now were not as strong as the high elves. The high elves were seen as the most perfect creatures that ever lived, and had a great natural advantage. In that era, high elves who reached adulthood would at least have the ability of a magic shooter. Reaching the archmage level was as common as a stage of growing up. Amongst the nobles of the high elves, it was very common to be at the legendary realm. The royalty was also expected to reach the sanctuary realm to have the right to the throne. Furthermore, high elves had a very long lifespan. That was not what human beings could compare themselves to. Unless they reached the archmage realm, they would only live for 50 or 60 years. Even if one were to become an archmage, he would only live up to 100 years. Only the legendary realm would allow one to live up to 500 years. Of course, once a human entered the sanctuary realm, he would be like a high elf. Just like Apophis, if he wanted to, he could live another 1,300 years. The two advantages naturally gave the high elves incredible strength. However, humans had their own perks as well. First and foremost, humans were more numerous compared to the high elves. There were at least 1,000 times more humans than high elves. According to the records from the Dark Age, the heyday of the high elves barely saw a population count of 220,000. On the other hand, there were already a few billion people in the Felon Kingdom. Even if there was only one outstanding mage from every 100,000 humans, humans would be more powerful than the high elves. Furthermore, unlike humans, the high elves did not have the ability to improve. The magic of the high elves' print was all inherited from the ancient dragon and Titan languages. That was the strongest force of magic in the world. In the words of the high elves, this ability came from the gods. However, apart from Osric and a few geniuses, no other high elf made any alterations or innovations to magic throughout the entire Dark Age. Humans, however, had been enhancing magic theories and concepts ever since the magic system had been established by Juresco 1,300 years ago. Talents from the subsequent generations used their own intelligence to improve that system. Although human magic was not more powerful than the magic the high elves had inherited from the dragon and Titan languages, it was the most suitable magic for humans to study. Although humans had yet to recreate the glory and civilization that the high elves had established in the field of magic after 1,300 years, their refined combat skills were comparable to, or rather, better than the high elves. After all, the human population was greater than that of the high elves. The death of a mage would see him replaced by many new mages. Everything was due to Juresco's efforts, the establishment of a magic system for humans, and the building of the Supreme Council and magic guilds, allowed human magic to develop so excellently till today. In the entire history of Amril, there was no other name more glorious than Juresco's. Even the creator of the High Elves dynasty, the immortal king, would not have been able to surpass Juresco's fame. After all, it had been ages since the immortal king's era. That honorable past had already sunk deep beneath the dust of history. I had a bet with Juresco 1,300 years ago. However, I have lost. There was a sense of dismay underlying Tutankhamun's voice. According to the deal, I have to stay in the Blackstone Mountains to protect some of his things until people arrive to claim them. You mean that those things, Hutton's voice shook terribly. He nearly bit his tongue while talking. Any mage would know that although Juresco did not leave behind many things in Amril, each of his possession could be described as a priceless treasure. One of the most valuable item would be the magic staff in Alana Guild of Magic. That magic staff had been protecting Alana Guild of Magic for a period of 1,300 years. That guild maintained its noble status ever since, and everyone who entered the guild had to bow to the magic staff. These people included the King of Felon, the Pope of the Brilliant Shrine, and the arbitrators of the Supreme Council. The inheritance from the magic god not only embodied extreme mystery, but also gave anyone in possession of it the recognition of the magic god, just like the Supreme Council and Alana Guild of Magic. That's right, it is you too, Tutankhamun said as he reached out his finger and pointed at Hutton, and then at Stephen. Your ancestors were disciples of Juresco. Me and Juresco had a bet that required me to pass his inheritance to the descendants of his disciples after 1,300 years if I lost the bet. Mr. Tutankhamun, may I ask what item it is? Stephen interrupted excitedly. The inheritance of Juresco would be enough to let the Dark Blade rule over the entire breezy plains. Juresco left behind 3 items. A magic book, a key, and a magical crystal. Tutankhamun told the men openly. Magic book? Hutton's eyes was wide open. He was filled with bewilderment. Why, you mean, the Book of Eternity? Yes. Oh my God, Hutton exclaimed, dazed. He could not say another word. The Book of Eternity was a legend by itself. It was said that each human mage of the Dark Age owned a unique magic book. It was extremely challenging for humans to practice magic during that era. Unlike the High Elves, they could neither comprehend the dragon scripture nor the language of the Titans. Having no opportunity to enter any guild of magic then, they could only learn directly from human mentors. Apart from Juresco, the other human mages only had 1 mage apprentice as they only had 1 magic book each. To the human mages then, the magic book represented the knowledge and experience they had gained in their life. While Juresco's book similarly recorded his knowledge about magic and experience from his research, his book had another function. Juresco, the man who was born on the last year of the Dark Age, had a unique magic book. That book was called the Book of Eternity. Its pages were made from the Tree of Eternity, while the ink used to write the spells in the book was personally extracted from the Tree of Eternity by Juresco. People who had experienced that era would know the value of Juresco's Book of Eternity. The book itself had infinite powers. There were also many human mages who treated the book as the strongest magical weapon of that era. However, no one knew where the book vanished when Juresco disappeared. That was a concern shared by mages in Amril. Many legendary mages believed that anyone who could lay his hands on the Book of Eternity would make it to the sanctuary realm in a breeze. Of course, that belief might not be entirely true. After all, no one other than Juresco had seen the Book of Eternity. Yet, there was something that would not be doubted: the powers of the Book of Eternity would definitely not lose to Alana's magic staffs. As Tutankhamun nodded his head gently, the air within the wooden house became very stale. No one expected that Juresco had left behind such a treasure. Now, even Lin Li, who was not involved in the matter, could not help but hold his breath. To Hutton and Stephen, it was definitely a meat pie that fell from the sky. Although they knew from their family's scriptures of the benefit the Blackstone Mountains would bring them very long ago, they did not expect the benefit to be so amazing. It was the Book of Eternity left behind by the god of mages, Juresco. However, after that great surprise, both men landed their doubtful and cautious gazes on Lin Li. It was only normal to react this way, as the matter was related to the Book of Eternity, a book that could bring any mage the highest achievements with just a step. Any generous mage would become stingy because of it. Of course, these two were not generous to begin with. The records on the Book of Eternity was the god of mages Juresco's knowledge and experience. It was a treasure any mage dreamt to attain. The possession of the Book of Eternity would mean that one had acquired the shortcut to heaven. This shortcut could let any mage enter the sanctuary realm without much effort. One might even reach the realm higher than that. Furthermore, the Book of Eternity had an invincible strength that no one could describe. However, it would definitely be no less powerful than the magic staff that guarded Alana Guild of Magic. After all, the magic staff was what Juresco used in his younger days, while the Book of Eternity was the work of his entire life. Who could be generous when such a huge profit was just right in front of them? Hutton was fine. He gave Lin Li a weird glance before lowering his head in silence. He knew that the young president was not somebody to be trifled with. Unlike Hutton, Stephen cared less about Lin Li. Stephen was the youngest mage that grew up in the most powerful bandit organization of the Breezy Plains. He had always been showered with the love and guidance of the 3 elders, and had not experienced many setbacks in his life or feared anybody. Over time, he started to look down on everybody. There were few people he respected in the Breezy Plains. Especially in the younger age group, Hutton was the only one he felt respect for. As for the guild president who emerged out of nowhere, Stephen had absolutely no interest in him. Since he had not heard of Lin Li's name, He assumed that he was a man with no background or much ability. How could such a man put his hands on Juresco's inheritance? Mr. Tutankhamun, I have a question. Since Juresco only had 2 disciples, does that mean that people who are not involved in this matter should leave this place earlier? Stephen asked politely, but his gaze resting on Lin Li was filled with obvious enmity. Lin Li laughed awkwardly at Stephen's query. He did not rebut his words. By this time, if there were people who knew Lin Li around, they would think that they had lost their eyesight. How could the fella who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance be so easy to talk to? That was a more unusual scene as compared to watching flowers grow on an iron tree and a rooster lay eggs. Could it be that the fella suddenly understood the virtue of restraining his anger? Of course not. The reason behind his calmness was the similar curiosity Lin Li shared. Lin Li could not understand why Tutankhamun included him in the conflict for Juresco's inheritance. Tutankhamun might not have known Lin Li's origin, but Lin Li knew very well he was from other world. That world was totally unrelated to the god of mages in Amrel. It is true that Juresco only had 2 disciples. However, I added another condition into the bet then. That is, apart from the descendants of the 2 disciple, I have the right to appoint another talented mage to join the competition, Tutankhamun said as he stood up from the table. Alright, I have finished what I had to say. Wait here and let me retrieve some things for you to see. The 3 men sat for another minute doubtfully. Then, they saw Tutankhamun coming out of his bedroom with a black crate. The crate was around 2 square feet. From the dull metallic glow, it seemed that the box was made from a type of metal. However, the blackness of the box looked very unsightly after all the years. There was no magical wave. It seemed to be just a normal metal crate. The 3 things Juresco left behind are all in this box, Tutankhamun said smilingly as he placed the box on the wooden table gently. He was not in a rush to open it. Mr. Tutankhamun, could we take a look at the Book of Eternity? The gazes of Hutton and Stephen became tense as they looked at the crate with a burning excitement. They could not help but hope Tutankhamun would open the metal box immediately to let them have a look at the relics of the god of mages. Since they are yours, there is no harm showing them to you guys, Tutankhamun said before showing an uneasy expression. But, I suddenly recalled that Juresco did not pass the key to this box to me. So, if you want to look at the Book of Eternity, I'm afraid you have to think of a way to open the crate yourself. How difficult could it be? Stephen laughed in relief. He was still nervous about what Tutankhamun wanted to tell them, so it was just to open a locked metal box. One of the 3 legendary powerhouses of the Dark Blade was a legendary level bandit. Although he chose to become a mage, he had learnt many skills exclusive to bandits. He had long mastered the skill of lock-picking. Not to mention a small metal crate, if it were the door to Felon's treasury, he had the same confidence to unlock it if he was given enough time to do so. Alright, Tutankhamun replied as he pushed the metal box towards Stephen. You shall open it, then. No problem. Stephen put one of his hands on the box, and fished out a thin iron wire from his pocket. Very quickly, the iron wire entered the rusty keyhole. After turning the wire twice, Stephen slowly leaned over and put his ear against the box. How he tried to analyze every sound from the keyhole was just like a masterful bandit. Oh shit. Hutton groaned to himself. The Manhwa family and Dark Blade had been competing with each other for a few centuries. How could he not know about the existence of the legendary level bandit in the Dark Blade? Now that he watched Stephen pick the lock skillfully, Hutton knew that Stephen had to have been trained in that domain. That was not a good thing to Hutton. He knew very well that the items within the box were the relics of the god of mages, Juresco. Although Tutankhamun did not say much when he took out the box, everyone knew the competition had begun. As long as one of them could pass the tests Tutankhamun gave them, the person would be able to acquire the 3 relics within the metal crate. The unlocking of this box had to be one of the tests. Once Stephen managed to open that box, President Felix and himself would be greatly disadvantaged in that competition. While Hutton was silently dreading that possibility, Lin Li was totally at peace with himself. He shifted his gaze from Stephen back onto the black metal crate. Lin Li was not the least bit concerned about himself being at disadvantage if Stephen were to open that box. That was because Lin Li knew very well that Stephen would not be able to open that box. Just when Stephen was picking the lock, Lin Li let out his mental strength to inspect the box for quite a while. There were no magical waves on the surface of the box at all. That was usually what normal people would expect when they saw that dull metallic surface. It looked just like any other common metal box. It was not strange for it to lack magical waves. However, the fact that the box contained the Book of Eternity changed everything. The Book of Eternity had the knowledge that was the essence of Juresco's whole life. Every page was created from the Tree of Eternity that had incredibly strong magical force, not to mention that the box was made from a normal metal. Even if it had been crafted from the eternal adamantine, it would not have been able to conceal the powerful magical waves within it. Although Lin Li still had no idea as to how the box functioned, he was only sure that knowledge of magic was required to open it. One would never be able to succeed just by thrusting a random iron wire into the keyhole like Stephen, even if he had 100 years to do so. This is weird. Lin Li's doubts grew bigger the longer he looked at the box. How could a common metal crate be able to conceal the magical wave of the Book of Eternity? Could it be that the box had been treated by mageweths? That couldn't be it. There are neither obvious mageweth markings on the box, nor the source of mana that could supply the box with power. Even if the box had been treated by a mageweth, it would not have lasted for 1,300 years. Frack. Just when Lin Li was still trying to figure out the workings of the box, a bit of rust flew into his eyes. Then, he saw a bright glow in front of him. When he looked at Stephen again, his gaze was filled with sympathy. Trouble definitely would follow such careless thrusting. Lin Li was right. Such careless thrusting would definitely lead to trouble. Just when Stephen was putting all his attention on turning the iron wire in his hands, there was suddenly an eccentric magical wave that radiated from the metal box. The magical wave was as unusual as one could possibly imagine it to be. There were no signs to tell the source of the magical wave. It was as if the magical wave had appeared out of nowhere. Furthermore, that magical wave changed very quickly. At the beginning, it was nothing but a trace of magic. Immediately after, it was amplified and changed into a surging tide of magic. It was like a huge wave, and was rushing towards Stephen at top speed. F***ck. Stephen exclaimed. Being a high-ranking archmage who had good and accurate control over the flow of mana, Stephen could sense the danger when the magical wave rushed towards him. However, danger came too quickly. A high-ranking archmage like Stephen could not keep up with the changes happening at the speed of light. It was faster than the speed at which mana usually flowed at. At that instant, Stephen only managed to cast a water shield before getting engulfed by numerous beams of light. Lin Li witnessed everything very clearly. The beams of light were actually numerous magic arrows. Among the offensive spells, the impact of magic arrows was not the weakest, but it was one of the weaker spells. It couldn't be helped. This was a very simple and shabby spell that did not require any elemental sequencing. One just had to let the magic out for the spell to take effect. This was the only spell a mage apprentice could instantaneously cast. However, it was not frequently employed by them as it was really weak. That was no exaggeration. There was a mage who did the calculations very long ago. If one were to use a magic arrow against a 4-element shield, it would require him to cast it 100 times for cracks to appear in the shield. As for shields that were stronger than the 4-element shield, it would be almost impossible. However, there were millions of magic arrows that shot out. Collectively, they looked like a meteor shower. Quantitative change led to qualitative change. That overwhelming volley of magic arrows broke Stephen's water shield instantaneously. That was a fatal crisis. No archmage could survive in such a situation. Unless he had his own magical domain after he reached the legendary realm, he would not be able to make use of the laws of magic to alter the direction of the mana within the magic arrows. However, everything would have an exception. Although Stephen was not in the legendary realm, he survived the attack of the million magic arrows miraculously. Stephen plucked out his necklace at the instant when the magic arrows broke the water shield. Lin Li could not believe how that action allowed Stephen to create several layers of elemental shields instantaneously. He counted 7 layers of the shield, and saw that the shields stacked on top of each other, creating an impregnable magic wall. Lin Li assumed that the wall would also be able to resist a legendary-level powerhouse for quite a while. It was this magic wall that saved Stephen. However, even if the elemental shield had 7 layers, it did not have the ability to protect Stephen entirely. In fact, Stephen looked totally different when that meteor shower ended. He looked as if he was just trampled by 100 elephants. There were big and small wounds that looked especially terrifying in critical regions. If some had hit a little more to the side, Stephen's small life would have ended. Stephen breathed heavily and struggled to drink a bottle of recovery potion. He looked more resolved after that, but the bloodstains on his face and tattered long black robe made him really wretched. What happened? Hutton exclaimed worriedly after seeing Stephen's miserable state. Juresco did not say anything when he passed the box to me. Other than wanting me to wait for you guys here to retrieve the things, I'm not aware of other matters, Tutankhamun said as he waved his hands indifferently. Are you saying that you don't know? Stephen snapped in rage. This box has been with you for 1,300 years. How could you not know anything? Stephen's rage was justified. He'd nearly died from those magic arrows that rained on him. If it were not for his quick reflexes to cast 7 layers of the elemental shield, he would not have been able to stand there alive anymore. You should ask Juresco. Tutankhamun still sounded unaffected. However, Lin Li knew that if Stephen still continued to make a fuss, he would be in trouble. Tutankhamun was a descendant of the Dragon of Destruction. Being one of the invincible black dragons of the world, how could his honor be challenged by a mere archmage? To be honest, Lin Li would not mind if Tutankhamun intended to punish Stephen. But, now is not the time. There was no time to waste now. The mana depletion would only last for a maximum of 5 minutes. If they were to miss the chance, there would only be another unlucky fella. I shall try it, then, Lin Li said as he stood from the table. You? Stephen questioned disdainfully. First-hand experience gave Stephen the clearest understanding of how impactful the magic force within the metal box was. That blanket of magic arrows had the ability to pierce through the 4-element shields. Despite employing the Dark Blade's strongest magical equipment, the Element Psi necklace, it could only act as a temporary defense mechanism. Only a legendary-level individual could balance the force of the attack. As for that President Felix, he still needs another century to do that. Yeah, Lin Li replied, and did not care about Stephen's disdainful gaze. He took his time to search his pocket. Shortly after, Lin Li fished out a dark metal rod. Lin Li had not used this rod that had been coated with deep mithril ever since he defeated Cromwell in the battle in Gerosis. Magical enchantment required a huge amount of magical crystals, and Lin Li only took interest in magical enchantment at least at master level. He would need to use dozens of level 15 magical crystals and drain half of his energy for the enchantment. Furthermore, there was no need for Lin Li to employ any enchantment spells now. Anduin once advised him against heavy reliance on magical equipment. He was afraid that the illusion of strength would lead Lin Li astray, and he'd lose the opportunities to improve. However, Lin Li did not intend to use mere magical enchantment this time. The dull gold rod was not least eye-catching. It only emitted faint magical waves in Lin Li's hands like a low-level magic scroll or some lousy magical equipment. At this time, not only Stephen, even Hutton who knew the abilities of President Felix started to become confused. Hutton could recognize the gold rod as specialized equipment used by magical enchanters. However, he could not fathom the intention behind President Felix bringing it out. Did he think the magic arrows weren't powerful enough? Did he want to make the magic arrows more deadly with magical enchantment? I still thought you would have a good idea, Stephen commented. He could not suppress his sense of disdain for Lin Li. I say, President Felix, are you intending to use that metal rod to open the box? "Hush," Lin Li whispered, not affected by the meager insult. He did not even lift his eyelids when he turned to look at Stephen. "Mage Stephen, don't you want to change into a new set of clothes? Or do you think it is nicer to expose your whole buttocks to the world?" Lin Li asked, sincerely. Stephen's expression changed. He touched his behind subconsciously and realized his skin had gotten exposed from the attack. Although it was only a palm-sized hole in his robe, and nothing as exaggerated as what Lin Li said, this had become his most embarrassing moment in his entire life, which he had been living in utmost comfort and luxury. As the young leader of the Dark Blade, and the top archmage in the Breezy Plains, it was an extreme insult to be pointed out for his exposed bottom in public. Stephen's palish face turned green, and his veins surfaced on his tightly clenched fist. If not for Tutankhamun and Hutton, he would have launched an attack. Lin Li did not even look at Stephen. He held on to that mithril-coated gold rod and placed it on the metal box gently. What followed was a brilliant glow of light. The air in the wooden house became stale. It was as though Stephen, Hutton, and Tutankhamun, 2 humans and 1 black dragon, were trapped by a mysterious force. They could not help but rub their eyes. The metal box was gone. "Frack," Hutton cussed as he held his head. "This can't be. This can't be." Stephen shrieked. It sounded as though he was being strangled. "This is an illusion." "Illusion?" Tutankhamun was the calmest among the 3. After casting a quick glance at the space where the metal crate disappeared, he put his gaze on the gold rod. Although the gold rod still had the same dullness, there was an additional foggy layer of halo around the tip of the rod. If one had not looked at it carefully, he would have thought that it was just a reflection of the light earlier on. However, Tutankhamun was no average man. Having lived for countless years, that black dragon had in-depth knowledge about magic as compared to most mages in Amril. How could he not know that the halo was left behind by Juresko's metal crate? That was the essence of magic. Only an enchanter's gold rod could extract the purest source of mana. However, even Tutankhamun would not have thought that a young mage would open the box with such a technique. In fact, Juresko actually wrote down the way to open the box when he passed the metal crate to him. It was Tutankhamun who decided to use the box to test the 3 young mages. Stephen's failure was within his expectations. How could a metal crate that was made from elemental metal be opened by a normal lock-picking technique? The elemental iron was also known as a living magical metal. It had very incredible mana that grew with time. As though it had an ability to meditate, the iron could grow in strength every second. There were also elemental iron mineral veins that had been around for 1,000 years that were as powerful as an archmage. However, that was not the most eccentric part of elemental iron. The reason that made elemental iron known as magical metal was its innate ability to cast spells. The presence of external factors could trigger the iron to cast spells independently, and the way it cast them would be determined by the way it had been forged. During the Dark Age, there were many high elven smithing masters that could forge many weapons with different magical attributes just by using a piece of elemental iron. Initially, the method that Juresko left behind was to destroy the magic suppression spell that was cast on the metal crate. Then, one had to solve 3 quizzes that required entry-level inscription knowledge to unlock the metal box to retrieve the Book of Eternity. Unfortunately, Juresko could not have expected somebody to use such a violent method to open the crate after 1,300 years. The use of a gold rod to directly disassociate the elemental iron was a very unreasonable technique. However, Tutankhamun had to admit that it was a very effective way. Of course, one had to be a master-level enchanter and own a powerful gold rod to be able to succeed. Otherwise, such a forceful method would only trigger the elemental iron and get himself submerged in raining magic arrows. "Hold on," Tutankhamun commented. He suddenly realized that the young man placed his gold rod during the time of depletion of the elemental iron. This meant that he would never have been harmed even if he'd failed to disassociate the elements. Hence, Stephen had merely become cannon fodder by taking lead so enthusiastically. "Damn, this fella is sly. That gave that kid a huge advantage," Tutankhamun thought to himself. He was not an amateur like Hutton and Stephen. Although he did not specialize in magical enchantment, the vast knowledge and experience he had accumulated over the years allowed him to grasp critical aspects of any issue. Elemental iron was one of the most valuable magical metals in Amril. During the Dark Age, 1,300 years ago, only the royals of the High Elves had the right to use magical equipment made from elemental iron. Furthermore, the powers of elemental iron grew with time. When Juresco created this crate, the elemental iron mineral vein he used was at least a few thousand years old. The mana within it was comparable to a magical crystal's. By itself, the essence of magic had neither form nor substance. It would only radiate dazzling beams of light after undergoing a complicated elemental sequencing. Although the halo on the tip of the gold rod was faint, its mere existence was terrifying enough. If one were to make good use of that essence of magic, he would be able to complete at least 3 magical enchantments at the master level. Furthermore, it being extracted from the elemental iron allowed the essence of magic to inherit qualities unique to the elemental iron. This meant that if one were to use that essence for magical enchantment, the equipment undergoing the enchantment would also grow in power as time passed. Over time, it would be as great as the legendary divinity metal. If we let this essence of magic take its effect on a magical weapon that was made of the divinity metal. The thought made Tutankhamun smile. How could the divinity metal land in the hands of a mortal? All of the divinity metal had been dug out during the prehistoric times, when the Titans battled with the dragons. Those metals were used to create 12 Titan dragon spears. Now, anybody who wanted to get their hands on any magical weapon made from that metal could only enter the Pantheon to look for the remains of the 12 golden Titans. Tutankhamun still did not know that it was exactly what Lin Li intended to do. By this time, Lin Li had already planned out what magical equipment he wanted to forge. He just had to bring that essence of magic back to start work immediately. "Oops, I opened it accidentally," Lin Li said as he smiled hypocritically, and put away the gold rod with the essence of magic casually. Hutton nearly went out of breath. "Can you put more effort into your pretense of humbleness? How could you say that you unlocked the box when you actually let such a big crate disappear? What a shameless man." On the other side, Stephen realized that he would never see Felix embarrass himself. He realized he was the joke. If that happened to any other man, it would be nothing to fuss about. However, Stephen was a man who experienced comfort and luxury ever since he was born. No one in the Dark Blade would go against his wishes. This included his 3 elders. They would dote on him and fulfill all of his requests. Over time, he had grown to become a man who could never handle any failures. Stephen had thought that he would be the first to claim all the objects within the metal box. He had not expected himself to be attacked so miserably by the numerous magic arrows when he actually employed the utmost refined skill of lock-picking, which most mages did not know. How could that mage Felix resolve all issues with just one gentle touch of a metal rod? The stark difference between himself and Felix naturally induced hate within him. However, Stephen had not been blinded by anger. He knew that there was still a Hutton who came from the Manhwa family by his side. If he were to start a battle, Hutton would be very happy to join forces with Felix to get rid of himself. Hence, Stephen only gave Felix one deadly glare, before lowering his head again. No one knew what was on his mind. After the blinding light beams faded, the relics of the god of mages appeared. There were 3 items lying quietly on the wooden table. They were namely a book, a key, and a magical crystal. There was a handwritten sentence on the cover page of the book: "Knowledge is the most powerful belief of a mage. This is really the book of eternity." That sentence was a well-known quote by the god of mages. He said it while standing on the top of the omniscient tower on the day Alana Guild of Magic was established. Ever since, it had become a quote every mage held dearly by. The 3 young mages would believe the book on the table to be the real book of eternity even without that quote. There was a chance for everything in the world to be fake, but not magical waves. In Amril, mages were always referred to as prophets and intellectuals. That was because mages used their hearts instead of their eyes to make sense of the world. There were many things that could lie to the eyes, but not the heart. Hence, a mage could identify the issue of any topic critically even if there were thousands of strands and loose ends before him. It was like the Book of Eternity before them. Although the three men had not met Juresco before, the sight of the book enabled them to understand that it was the true copy left behind by Juresco lying on the table. In that moment, Hutton and Stephen could not help but display burning passion and excitement in their eyes. That was very normal. Any mage who saw the relics of the god of mages would have the same expression on their face. Furthermore, those were no ordinary relics. The Book of Eternity alone had the entire record of the knowledge and the experience of the god of mages. Lin Li was no exception. The only difference was that the excitement in Lin Li's eyes only stayed there for a split second. His gaze landed on that magical crystal next to the book very quickly. "Oh my god," Lin Li gasped when he saw the crystal. The magical crystal was as big as a fist. It was definitely much bigger than the other crystals Lin Li had handled before. It would be good if the magical crystal of a common magical beast could be the size of a thumb. Even the crystal he got from killing the Crimson Python at Black Cloud's town was just twice the normal size. Lin Li had seen truckloads of magical crystals throughout his journey from the Endless World to the Emerald World. That would include high-end ones that were at least level 10, if not level 20. However, he had only seen 1.5 pieces of a crystal as big as this. One was the Heart of the Eternal Furnace, the rare legendary magical crystal of the fire Wyrm. The crystal was the size of a human head, and contained massive amount of mana sufficient for the furnace to function. In fact, the Eternal Furnace was a piece of war equipment made after Osric referenced the structure of the Sky Castle. The number of magical weapons, magical devices, and mageweapons, and the amount of mana needed to create the Eternal Furnace were astronomical. After Lin Li had descended into the furnace to put his spiritual brand on the fire Wyrm magical crystal, he gained huge benefits. One of them was reaching the Archmage level immediately. The remaining half of the crystal he had seen would be the one dug out from Azardas, the Dragon of Destruction. The reason why it was halved was because Lin Li still could not extract any bit of mana. He had tried everything he could for the past 1 year. He traveled from the Endless World to Amril, but to no avail. It was as if that was just an ordinary stone. Lin Li remembered very clearly that he had skinned Azardas and had ridden it of its veins. He had searched Azardas' body very thoroughly. He went through its skin, bones, veins, blood, and even fur, but could not find any other objects related to the Wyrm crystal other than that stone. Furthermore, how would there be a stone within the Dragon of Destruction? Unless it got gallstones from a sedentary life, by sleeping in its cave. Alright, even if that happened, it did not make sense for the stone to be growing in its head. After eliminating everything else that would never happen, there could only be one conclusion: the stone-like object Lin Li had got from the dragon was a real magical crystal. That was the largest magical crystal Lin Li had seen in his life. Oh, yes. I shouldn't let Tutankhamun know this. Who knows if he is the son of the Dragon of Destruction? Although it was a different world, it would definitely offend him. For his sanctuary-level abilities, he would be able to seek revenge for his father any time he wanted. Even if Lin Li had 10 lives, the result would be his death. That thought caused Lin Li to steal a quick glance at Tutankhamun guiltily. After realizing that the expression of the descendant of the Dragon of Destruction remained unaffected, he managed to calm down gradually and direct his focus on the magical crystal again. Lin Li discovered that Stephen and Hutton were all looking intently at the Book of Eternity. They were not a bit interested in that magical crystal, which came together with the book. That was because the magical wave emitted by the magical crystal was definitely incomparable to that of the Book of Eternity. If the Book of Eternity was a bright moon, then the magical crystal had to be a firefly. Although its magical wave was not weak, it was certainly ordinary. Judging from the frequency of the wave, the maximum would only be around level 15. A level 15 magical crystal would be an uncommon treasure to the usual mages, yet when it came to Stephen and Hutton, coming from the Dark Blade and the Manhwa family, respectively, their taste had long surpassed that of common mages. To them, a level 15 magical crystal was good. But, it was just good. they would rather pay more attention to the Book of Eternity. In the beginning, that was what Lin Li thought. One really shouldn't be so bothered by a level 15 magical crystal. But shortly after, Lin Li realized something was amiss. If it was a level 15 magical crystal, how would it deserve to be placed together with the Book of Eternity? It was even one of the items included in the bet for Tutankhamun to help protect for 1,300 years. Who was Juresco? He was the most invincible mage in the entire history of Amril. How could such a powerful man face any challenge in finding any magical crystal? Why would he care to put in so much effort for a level 15 crystal? This magical crystal is really strange. At this moment, Hutton and Stephen had their gazes fixed on the Book of Eternity. Only Lin Li had the mood to direct all his focus on the strange magical crystal. God damn it, I know it now! Lin Li exclaimed out loud. His voice startled the two men beside him. Hutton was less affected. He glanced at Lin Li and gave him an awkward smile. Stephen, on the other hand, had his brewing fury towards Lin Li surge over the limits. He shot up from his seat and hollered at Lin Li, "Are you crazy?" Sorry, I'm just excited." Stephen's reaction allowed Lin Li to realize that the crystal had made him forget himself. Frankly speaking, Lin Li was not a man that would apologize. Anybody who was familiar with him would know that Lin Li's apologies were the calm before the storm. If he were to do that, you'd have to be cautious about him suddenly falling out with you. However, Lin Li was really sincere in his apology this time. Firstly, he recognized his inappropriate reaction. Secondly, his mind was still full of the crystal. If he guessed it right, the value of the magical crystal would be greater than that of the Book of Eternity. Normally, Stephen would have calmed down when things reached this point. Since it was a trivial matter, and the apology had been given, it would not make sense to make things difficult. However, Stephen probably ate the wrong medicine today. Despite the fact that Lin Li said the word sorry twice, Stephen continued to lash out at him like a wretch. He lost the demeanor he prided himself for. "I say, Mage Stephen, do you think you have said enough?" snapped Lin Li after he collected himself, only to realize that Stephen was still lashing out at him. Stephen's words were very unkind. He called Lin Li a moron and retard, and even cussed at Lin Li's parents. At the start, Lin Li could still treat those words like an annoying housefly buzzing around. Now that his parents were brought up, though, anybody with a good temperament would have been affected one. What was more, Lin Li was not a person with good temperament to begin with. Lin Li naturally was very eloquent. While he still decided not to stoop to Stephen's level at the start, the anger within him let him unleash all his coarse and harsh words. Before coming to the breezy plains, I've heard many people say that Master Borg was an incredibly amiable elder. As a legendary mage, he'd never once put on any air before others. Mage Stephen, as Master Borg's son, don't you think it is too much to sulk over such a trivial matter? To be honest, I would like to suggest that you ask your mother if Master Borg went for a long trip when she had you. Pfft. Hutton and Tutankhamun nearly spat their saliva when they tried to hold back their laughter. Especially Hutton, who came from the Manhwa family. The two great forces of Eminia had been fighting each other for over a century, and their relationship was like that between fire and water. Hutton naturally had to show some support to the person who had the guts to criticize Stephen so harshly. "What long trip are you talking about?" Stephen had a slower processing time. He thought about that phrase for quite a while before bursting in rage. His glare towards Lin Li nearly shot out flames. If Lin Li said that his father left for a long trip when his mother was having him, did that mean he was calling him a bastard? "Are you calling me a bastard?" Stephen's face turned from red to white, and then from white to green. His fists were clenched so tightly that the sound of his knuckles cracking could be heard. He would not have dreamt that he would be called a bastard once in his entire life. "You said that yourself, not me," Lin Li replied as he pursed his lips indifferently. Ordinary people would not have dared to offend Stephen because of the three legendary powerhouses behind him, and the fact that the Dark Blade was the most powerful bandit organization in the breezy plains. However, who was Lin Li? Lin Li was a man who had the guts to touch the buttocks of every tiger. How could he be afraid of the dark blade? Furthermore, his character had always been open to persuasion, but not to coercion. Even if he feared the dark blade, it would not be a reason to bend his back to them. On the contrary, if it reached that stage, the only thing Lin Li would do was to get rid of Stephen without a word. No one dares to insult me like this in the breezy plains. You are the first. Stephen's gaze turned colder, and his hand was clutching his magic staff very tightly. A massive magical wave made the surrounding air seethe. Stephen completed this sentence in blocks, and his gaze resting on Lin Li was as though he was looking at a dead man. You will pay dearly for what you said. Boom. A muffled sound could be heard. Stephen flew off like a bullet, slamming into the wooden wall behind him. Thankfully for Tutankhamun, although the wooden house looked very simple and crude, the walls he built were as firm as those in a fortress. Stephen's landing did not break Tutankhamun's hut's walls, but just made the entire wooden house greatly vibrate. However, that was the problem. The firmer the wooden house, the greater the impact of Stephen's crash. Stephen spat a mouth of blood the moment that dull sound reverberated in the room. Moron, Lin Li said as he patted the dust off from his robe, and put the oil lamp away into his pocket. Stephen's state was miserable. Stephen had thought he could vent his anger with his own strength. He did not expect his opponent to be shameless enough to employ such powerful magical equipment. When he felt that his efforts were in vain, he realized that it was as though he was beaten up by an inflatable doll. Lin Li had a lot of such inflatable dolls. One of the most powerful ones was that oil lamp he just put back in his pocket. Within it was the owner of the 20th level of the Abyss, the legendary Lord of Nightmares. Lin Li had been summoning the Lord of Nightmares every day. Results had shown ever since he started to follow Kenoris's instructions. Lin Li's Lord of Nightmares was at level 19 currently, and he thought that it was a waste to use it the Tabulia level 17 or level 18 Archmage. Hutton witnessed the confrontation that started and ended swiftly. The expression on his face was very complicated. It looked as if he wanted to burst out laughing, but was trying very hard to hold in that laughter at the same time. Frankly speaking, Hutton was feeling extremely delighted at Stephen's plight. The sight of Stephen crashing into the thick wooden wall and spitting big mouths of blood was really satisfying. The lives of 300 bandits and the possibility of aid from Sendros had all stopped bothering Hutton at this moment. To an heir of the Manhwa family, what would be more satisfying than to watch the son of the leader of the Dark Blade be punched like a sandbag? Even Hutton, who had suffered bitterly and nursed deep hatred, would think that Lin Li should withdraw from the confrontation now. After all, Stefan was the son of the leader of the Dark Blade. The organization would not have dared to challenge the Supreme Council to seek trouble with the Guild of Magic over a minute matter. However, if Stephen were to die, the Dark Blade would certainly declare war against the Guild of Magic even if all the arbitrators begged them not to. Unfortunately, Hutton guessed it wrongly again. After putting the oil lamp into his pocket, Lin Li immediately walked over to Stephen and stepped on his chest. Mage Stephen, I told you that you should stop. You don't think you can get away with this for long, Stephen said with clenched teeth. Although he was under Lin Li's foot, the sense of toxic hatred in Stephen's eyes did not decrease. He gave Lin Li an intense and piercing stare. You will pay for what you have done. Not just you, but your friends, kin, and everyone related to you will be hunted down by the Dark Blade eternally. Lin Li rubbed his nose. Mage Stephen, is that a threat? Asked Lin Li as he looked at him with a serious gaze. Moron, Stephen gave a dry laughter on the ground. Do you think you can do whatever you want in the breezy plains with just a single piece of powerful magical equipment? Fat hope. If not for my carelessness, do you think you'd have the opportunity to defeat me? We have much of the similar magical equipment in the Dark Blade. You should go back to wash your neck while you wait for us. You will be hunted down by the Dark Blade the moment I leave the Blackstone Mountains. No matter where you hide, the assassins will have their ways to dig you out. They would not kill you immediately when they catch you. Instead, they will torture you slowly until the last drop of your blood is drained. Then, you will die in suffering. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.